Can you see me?
For tonight's subject, yeah, we can see you, Michael. For tonight's subject, Parshas Bamidbar and coming up to Kabbalah HaTorah, I'd like to talk about the topic of special numbers in Jewish thought. Now, it's obvious to anyone who's somewhat involved in Jewish practice that we ascribe quite a lot of significance to specific numbers. And I would say that a very extreme example of this in our parsha, let me rephrase that. There's an extreme example of attention to numbers in our parsha. And many years ago, when I was reflecting on this, I developed a theory to explain why we have such an extraordinary emphasis in our parsha. I developed an idea which builds on the fact that we obviously attach great significance to a lot of numbers in Jewish thought. Now, I'm sure you know what I mean when I talk about this parsha, but let me just highlight it specifically. Torah said at the beginning of the Sedra, and indeed at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, that the Jewish people were counted, and then it says that they were counted in terms of the specific number of each shevet as well. So it says, for example, Vayiyu vnei Reuven, etc. Pkudeher Matei Reuven, the count of Reuven, Shisha v'arbaim elef, 64,500. Vnei Shimon, Tisha v'chamishim elef, 59,300. God, 54,650, and so on and so forth. I think it even goes further than that. After listing the numbers of every shevet, it then says the shvatim were gathered in groupings of the golim, 3 shvatim per degel, and then it gives you the total number. I believe it goes through the numbers of each shevet again and adds up the total number, as if you can do it yourself, for that degel. Now, on the surface, it makes no difference to us at all whether the number for Shevet Shimon was 59,000 or 61,000. We can't do anything with that information on the surface. Certainly, you don't need to repeat it. And certainly, given the fact that we know the Torah is usually so medactic with its loshen, and again, anyone who's learned a bit knows that the Gemara Darshans, the expression of the Gemara is tile tilim shel halachas, mounds of halachas on the tiniest nuance, perhaps even on a tag of a letter. It says that Kiva used to dash in the tagim of letters. We don't really need to go over that because that's a well-known principle, but just as we're talking about this topic, to bring out the idea, maybe the strongest expression, and one of the strongest expressions of the idea is in a famous medrash in Chaye Sarah, which says, it highlights how beautiful the Torah seems apparently to consider the speech of Eliezer, who was the Eved of Avraham Avinu, because when it comes to huge mounds of halachas, sometimes the Torah just says a few words or letters. I mean, all the 39 melachas of Shabbos with all their details, basically just le'sasach al melacha, a little bit more than that, but not much more. And yet the Torah spoke about the speech of Eliezer at great length, and it says this highlights the beauty of the speech of the servants of the fathers, which in turn, I suppose, reflected the way the Avos themselves spoke. And the way that's usually explained is that the beauty of it is the depths of good character and high standard of conduct that's reflected in it, and therefore you have to work on it and you have to analyze it. But it brings out the idea that generally when it comes to technical matters, the Torah certainly does not waste words. Just today I was learning a Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Kaf Ches Amud Aleph, and this is a very, very good example of that, because you know the idea that you can't be an aid for a relative. Now, we don't use real eidus very much. In Beis Din, most people are not familiar with Beis Din at all. But where we are, again, probably all very familiar with this is when it comes to weddings, we know that every chasna has witnesses, and they're always careful that the witnesses are not relatives to the chasna and kala, indeed not relatives to each other either. But what's not so well known is where that's learnt from, and what the parameters of that, which relatives does it apply to. And the Gemara source of that is in Sanhedrin Daf Kafches, and it's very interesting. There, the Pasuk says something like this. I'm just saying it by heart. Lo yumsu oves abonim, uvonim lo yumsu al oves, ish bechetoi yumos or yumosu. Seems to be saying, oves, fathers should not die on account of the sons should not die on account of their fathers. Each person dies on account of his own sin. The simple pshat, of course, is we all take responsibility for our own actions. But the Gemara darshans more than that, and that's already a chiddush in terms of the style that we use when we speak or when we write. We would think it perfectly appropriate and normal to emphasize the idea, to underscore that one idea with those three phrases. But the Gemara says that's not acceptable in terms of the the Torah's economy of words. It must be, since it says at the end of the pasuk, "Ish becheto yumos," or yumosu, each man dies for his sin. The earlier part of the pasuk about fathers not dying on account of sons and sons on account of fathers must be teaching us something else, because it can't possibly be repeating the same thing, and therefore it says that what it means is fathers can't die on account of the testimony given by their sons. So a person can't be incriminated in the Beis Din, in the Sanhedrin, by the edus of his father. And since it says it both ways round, a father can't incriminate the son, and the son can't incriminate the father. But actually it goes further, because the Gemara analyzes the nuance, relentlessly analyzes the nuances of the words. It says, hold on a minute, it doesn't say a father and a son, it says fathers and sons. So it's painting, it wouldn't add even those two extra letters, Vav and Sof, and Yud and Mem, for no reason. It's adding a nuance. You have to imagine a family tree with two fathers who are brothers and two sons, each of them has a son. So it's saying not only that the father and son can't give edus about each other, but the one father and the other son likewise, which means that we learn not only fathers and sons, but also uncles and nephews. And then it says, but hold on a minute. It could have said la yumsu or la yumas, something like ovois al ben, because if you have two fathers and one son, that already teaches, the son is the son of the one father, not of the other, that already teaches you that other relationship of uncle and nephew. So why does the Torah add bonim again? So it says, well, you've got two fathers, two sons. It must be that the first cousins can't give edus about one another. So we squeeze out of every single nuance whatever can be learnt from it. And again, you've learned Gemara, this is definitely familiar to you. This is a nice example, and it brings it out well. And it's a chance to learn this additional halacha as well. In fact, it goes even further, because there are two phrases, lo yum ovis abonim, or vonim lo yum alovis. So the Gemara darshans a second bonim as well, because it says, and I threw this in very briefly earlier, I said we know from weddings that relatives can't testify if they're relatives to chosn and kala, but actually they shouldn't be relatives to one another either, which is an additional chiddush, because they're not testifying about their relative. So it's sort of outward facing. Their relationship is to each other. But again, the extra unnecessary word or letters within the word bonim teaches you that those two sons shouldn't, it teaches you must include something that wasn't included previously in whatever we darshaned from the other words, and therefore it's darshaned that it teaches us that they cannot come together to give edus even against a stranger, and that teaches us that final nuance as well about fathers, sons, uncles, nephews, and cousins. In any event, the question is clear: why the need for all this detail about the exact number? Now, many years ago, I well, I saw it quoted actually, and then I went and purchased a book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Do you know the book? Well, by Oliver Sacks, who was Jewish actually, a what's expression, neurologist,
Neurologist.
Neurologist, a specialist of nervous and very odd brain disorders. And the fascinating story about the most amazing, astounding, very strange things that can go wrong within the neural pathways of the brain, perhaps the phrase is. There's one story that caught my eye there. A story, I think it's called The Twins. I mean, a lot of stories caught my eye, but this story caught my eye in the way that it inspired me or led me to a principle with which I suggest explaining this use of numbers that we find in Chumash. There was a pair of twins. I believe they were autistic, so it didn't function in terms of normal intellect. They seemed to be retarded. And he was studying them or treating them in some way for some purpose. And one day found them sitting seems to be on opposite sides of the table. And they were just speaking, they were just exchanging numbers. And initially I had no idea what they were doing. And it wasn't just simple numbers, it got to longer numbers of many digits. I wondered, what are they doing? Why should one be saying 1376415 and the other responds 2819837? On a hunch, he took a note of some of the numbers that they were saying and checked them. In those days, you can do it with a computer, but he had big books. And he found that they were all prime numbers. And he came back maybe an hour or two later and found them exchanging prime numbers of the most phenomenal length, 10 or 11 digits or something like that. A fantastic, fantastic story. So he brings out from that how these people who, in terms of normal functioning and normal conversation, seem retarded, but some part of their brain is operating on a fantastically high level. But what I took from the story, well, I took that as well, but another concept I took from the story was something different. I'm sure you've reflected on the nature of numbers. We know that that numbers are a very useful way of counting what we have, of dealing with what we have. But as well as that, we appreciate that numbers have a certain properties, if you like, to them. In other words, what's the difference between 2 and 3? Not simply that if I have £3, I have more money than if I have £2. If I have 3 pieces of cake, I might feel more satisfied or more overfull than if I have 2. It's not simply that, it's a different character. The number 2 lends itself to, in probably the most clear example, to a marriage relationship. But 3 doesn't really lend itself to that. So it's not only that it's a different quantity, but a different character as well. And you may think, imagine when you, for example, a good example for us is when you put on tefillin and you double check that you've wound 7 windings on your arm. How do you check it? Do you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or you somehow see 7, or maybe you see 3 and 4, because 3 kind of looks different to 4. So it's kind of the same idea that each number has a character and a property. To my mind, this is the way we should understand a lot of things in Yiddishkeit. For example, the idea of a minyan. 10 people make a minyan, 9 people don't. So the great sanctification of God's name through Kaddish and Kedusha that we can do with 10 people, we simply can't do with 9. Now, obviously, the simple pshat in that is, well, you've got to have a certain number, it's got to be a certain size crowd. And here's where we set the bar. But perhaps a deeper way to understand it is that 10 is somehow a grouping which is fundamentally different to 9 and to 8. Now, can I explain exactly in what way a crowd of 10 is capable of collectively creating the levels through the way they interact with one another, through their very coexistence in a fundamentally higher way than 9, which is the concept I'm suggesting? No, I can't explain that, but I'm suggesting that the very fact that the halacha exists teaches us that principle. Another example is there were 12 shvatim, and Yaakov Avinu had a tradition. If I can't have 12 shvatim, if one would be lost, when he thought Yosef was lost, he was desperately distressed because he knew that he needed mitosei shlema, he needed his offspring, a set of offspring to be absolutely complete. And 11 just wasn't 12. I think it's a remez. I'm trying to remember the exact context, so this is not something I prepared, something that spontaneously occurs to me. When he was on his deathbed and he ended up giving them the brachos, and they said, famously according to the Medrash, Hashem Echad, they spoke about achdus, of oneness. And one of the things that's quoted, the gematria of Echad is 13, but it's a 1 with the Chesed and Daled with the 12, which I guess suggests Yaakov Avinu and his 12 sons. Somehow it's not just about a number, it's about a number having a special character, a special quality. And I think that's a principle with which, as I say, even if we struggle to understand the particular quality inherent in many of the numbers, I think we can appreciate the idea that a number would have a special quality. Another very extreme example of that is on the pasuk. We say Shuv Hashem Rivavois Alfei Yisrael. That's the pasuk. Now Alfei Yisrael, Rivavois, a Rivavois is 10,000, and Elef is 1,000. So Rivavois is at least 2 10,000s. That makes 20,000, and in addition you have Alfei, which is 2,000. So I believe it's Rashi which says there, I think it's in Parshas Ba'aloischa, that the Shechina only settles, and we're talking about a certain level of Shechina, because they have a certain level of Shechina with 10 people, with 3 people, with 2 people. This is the Gemara in Brachos. I think it's on Daf Vav. This actually is another good example of what I'm saying, that a different number gives rise to a different level of Shechina. But there, what Chazal tell us is that 22,000 was a number with a particular ability to carry the Shechina. And again, I'm theorizing that is a property which exists. Well, it's definitely a property which exists with 22,000, not with 21,000. But I'm saying it probably doesn't even exist with 21,999, because it's only 22,000 which does it in a special way, which we can't necessarily understand, but we can understand the concept. And I suggest this is why the Torah gives the numbers for each Shevet, because it's saying each Shevet has a certain tachlis, a certain character, a certain nature, a certain calling, a certain mission, and nothing is b'mikra, nothing is coincidental. The number of people that were in that Shevet, the beginning of our history, was a number designed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to perfectly fit that purpose. And again, do we understand how the numbers correlate? Not necessarily, but I feel that one can still understand the concept, one can still suggest the concept is correct and even be inspired by that concept. And I think that's the way, and perhaps the only way, to understand why the Torah would take up all those words to tell us these numbers. There are a number of other very fascinating examples of this concept, which I want to share with you, the concept of special numbers in Jewish thought. And I've got really 4 points to share with you on this. We've got 22 minutes. That gives us about 5 minutes per one. The first is the time of year that we're in. The time of year that we're in, of course, is Sfras Ha'Omer, counting towards Kabbalas HaTorah. And we say Sheva Shabbosos to Mos Tihena. Obviously, we count 7 times 7 weeks. So one can't fail to be reminded this time of year of the significance of the number 7 in Jewish thought. And indeed, that there's it goes to another dimension, as it were. You have the 7, but you have 7 within a 7. So you have 7 cycles of 7. In Trias Omer, you have it also in, we had it in the Parsha last week, Sheva Shabtos Shanim, Sheva Shanim, Sheva Palmim, Shmitin, and Yovlois. And of course, 7 is reflected in the day of Shabbos, the days of the week. It's often explained, I think it's the Maral who's quoted as saying that 7 reflects somehow the totality of existence in this world. Because you have 3 dimensions, each of which, in context of each of which, you can go in one direction or the other. So you have 6 directions, and the 6 directions, as it were, emanate from a central point, or sort of linked by a central point. So the 7th is the center, and Shabbos is the center of the week. Somehow Shabbos characterizes bringing together as a completeness, the totality of this world. And where do you get to? What number do you get to if you transcend this world, as you do through Bris Milah, as you somehow do perhaps through Shmini Atzeres? Number 8, and that's the significance of the number 8. And it's also the significance of the number 50, because once you have the 7 sevens and you have 49, then and you break out of that, you transcend even that, then you get to 50. And 50, the number which kind of you can't say because it's transcendent. It's reaching the 49, but then going beyond to something which is beyond the count. We don't actually count 50, we just arrive at 50. And that's possibly the deeper meaning of the Pasuk. I used to think this was what Rashi was saying. Recently looking at it, it may not be quite what Rashi is saying, but the Pasuk says, Ad mochas ha-Shabbos ha-Shvi tisperu 50 yom. The simple pshat, till the end of 7 weeks, you count 50 days. But we don't count 50 days, we count only 49 days. So what is the meaning of that Pasuk? It seems to be tisperu, you count 50 yom, and then you arrive at the 50th day. And some have linked this to a concept that the Mesilas Yesharim, the Ramchal, writes when he talks about Kedusha. He said, Tchilosa avoda v'seifei gemul, that to reach certain levels of Kedusha, you have to work, you have to fight, you have to struggle with, one has to struggle with oneself. But in the end, seifei gemul, it's not that one makes oneself, brings oneself actually to that level. One brings oneself to the highest point that one can climb, and then the last bit is the gift. So again, that represents the totality, the 7 or the 49, and then the 8 or the 50, which goes beyond. A powerful example of the numbers and of their meaning in Jewish thought. Another example is possibly a Gemara as follows. Now, the simple pshat in this Gemara, you might well argue that it doesn't give special significance to numbers, but let me tell you an idea, and it's an interesting one, and do with it what you will. It's more of a chiddush than the previous idea. The previous idea is about minyan and 12 shvatim and 22,000. I think that are very specifically linked by halacha and by Jewish thought to a reality which exists with that number, not with another number. And the 7 and 49 and the 7 spheres, these ideas which have very solid foundations in thought and in Kabbalah. This is another idea which perhaps is more of a chiddush. The Gemara says in Chagiga that ein adom mishone pirkei mer pa'amim or mer pa'amim va'achas. Simple understanding that it's very valuable to learn and to revise, to do chazorah of one's learning, and one cannot compare somebody who learns his perek, learns whatever he's learning 100 times, to one who learns it 101 times. Of course, the simple pshat is that even if you learned it as much as 100 times, each additional time is extra. Another possible pshat one could learn in the Gemara is that it's emphasizing 100. To learn something 100 times is a huge number. But the Torah is saying even if you go beyond huge numbers and you keep going, you're still reaching an entirely different level of your learning. Another aspect of the Gemara is the Gemara says, "Seyulmad mi shuk shel chamorim." If you find it difficult to accept what I'm telling you, that 101 times is much better than is completely different to 100 times, go and learn it from the marketplace of donkey riders, the equivalent of which today is taxi drivers. That it may be that when you travel 10 miles with a taxi, or when you travel one zone on the tube, you pay a certain price. Suddenly you go an inch beyond that zone, you go one step into the congestion zone, then the next level is chal. And it doesn't matter. You can't say, well, had I gone one step less, I wouldn't have paid anything. Why do I have to pay now? What is it now? 8, 10, 20, 30 pounds congestion charge? I don't know, it's shooting up and up. But the point is that the threshold, and the instant you go beyond that threshold, you might have thought you've only quantitatively gone slightly further, but in truth, sometimes you break through a barrier and get to something completely different. And that's the idea of tariffs, and that may be what the Gemara is saying. And that may link to Pshatin, something that is said by the Chasam Sofer in a tshuva, which perhaps without adding this concept is very, very hard to understand. And that is this. You know that, you probably know this halacha that I utilize pretty much every time. It's twice a year, so 4 times altogether. Whenever we switch over from not Mashiv to Mashiv, or from Mashiv to not Mashiv to not Mashiv, and when we toggle between the same bracha and the same Talumot Livracha, we all know one of the very frustrating things is to get it wrong in davening, have to go back, or be unsure whether you have to go back and feel guilty at the fact that you may be going back and you may be saying all those brachas in vain. It's one of the frustrating things of the details of a halachic lifestyle. And the halacha says, based on Rishonim, well, the starting point is that if you're not sure what you said in any one of those instances, then for 30 days, you assume that you've not yet given yourself a chance to establish the new habit, and therefore you assume that you defaulted to your old habit. And then, as the case may be, you may have to go backwards, you may have to repeat Shemona Esrei and so on. But what it says is, according to many, and this is how we paskin, that you can substitute, instead of the 30 days, say there and then 90 times. 90 times is more or less what you'd say in 30 days, because it's 3 Shemona Esrei a day. I know you can work with the details of the maths. Mashiv Aruach, we say even in Musaf and so on. And same bracha and same Talmud Livracha, we don't say in the Shabbos Tefillah. So is it exactly 30 days? Okay, something to discuss. But the point is, you can compact the 30 days. You can squash the 30 days into half an hour by saying it 90 times and establishing oneself with that habit. Now, the Chasam Sofer, rather surprisingly, says, yes, you can do it with 90 times, but you remember that Gemara which says, Ein Adoma Meh Pam V'Achas to Meah, that 101 is completely different to 100. I would recommend that if you're doing it 90 times, do it 101 times. And the difficulty is, to my mind, if the Gemara is to be understood simply that 101 is very different to 100, and indeed 102 from 101, and 91 from 90, and 92 from 91, and so on. So why would you learn from that Gemara to say something 101 times instead of 90 times? Because Like I say, you could do 102 or 103 or 200. So where do you stop? Why would you go beyond the 90? But if you understand that the Chasam Sofer understood that the Gemara was teaching us that 101 had a particular special quality in learning, and the Gemara is choosing that number, dafka, then the Chasam Sofer would have said, you know what, the halach is 90, and that's fine. But evidently, if you do a little bit more, you'll be at so much of a higher level in terms of establishing the habit. It's a real hiddur mitzvah. It's like lighting one. It's like we light Neros Chanukah Mahadrin Min Mahadrin. That's what I would recommend. But as I say, to my understanding, that only works if you understand that the 101 is that special number with that special character. And that's my chiddush on that halacha of the Chasam Sofer. By the way, on that Gemara, there's one more pshat, just l'shleimus ha'inyan. I think it comes from one of the Hasidishes for him. He understands that the Gemara is saying there's no comparison between a person who learns his learning 100 times, or a person who learns 100 times, ve'echod or ve'achas, along with the one. In other words, he does it together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's aware of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, so to speak, learning with him. Coming back to the general significance of numbers and other examples of this, there are two more examples I want to share with you. One is which is very relevant to the time of year. Time of year being close to Shavuos, and another one which is neged to the Sedra. So the one which is neged to the time of year is the Gemara says in Shabbos, in the Sugi of Matan Torah, Peites, I think it's Peites around there. It says, acknowledges HaKadosh Baruch Hu, thanks HaKadosh Baruch Hu for giving Torah Tlisah. I think it says a threefold Torah, La'am Tlisah, to a threefold nation, through the third person, on the third month, and one or two other thirds. What it's saying, it's a threefold Torah, because there's Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim. It was given in the third month, because Nisan followed by Iyar, and then Sivan in the third month. It was given by the third, because Moshe was the third sibling after Miriam and Aaron. What did I say already? The threefold Torah, because of Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim. There are perhaps one or two other points, but the concept is clear. There's something special in the fact that the Torah has a threefold nature. What is its special character? Well, the Gemara doesn't explain. I did once hear from Mordechai Miller, the words he used was that 3 represents, he quoted this Gemara, he said 3 represents smichas emes, a sprouting of the truth. Why? Because if we have a debate, I have a point of view, and you have a point of view, and it's something that we haven't really thrashed out, we haven't debated. This is just my thought, and that is your thought. But because we see it differently, we will debate the matter. You'll pose all the difficulties, you'll ask the kashas that can be asked on my point of view. I'll do likewise to yours. And through that, we'll discern out of what each of us initially thought, a third approach, which will perhaps be a little bit of both. It'll be a distillation of the truth that each of us had immediately seen, and the truth grows from those two. It says, Shnei Ksuvim Aboim, Shnei Ksuvim Makrishim Zeh, we say every day in the Brayso of Rabbi Shmuel, Ad Sheyoveh HaKosav HaShlishi V'Yachriya Beineihem. When you have two psukim contradicting each other, ostensibly talking about the same thing, or saying something different, a third pasuk could shed light on the apparent contradiction, V'Yachriya Beineihem, decide between them. So there's 3 that smichas emes. Torah, of course, was the giving of the truth to the world, so somehow it connects with the threefold nature of the various ingredients that went into Torah, that went into giving of the Torah at the time. That's a number concept relevant to the time of year. And the final thought is at the beginning of the parasha, the Orach Chaim, the second Orach Chaim in the Sedra, my uncle showed it to me the other day, he asks a difficulty. If you look at the numbers, I haven't got the psukim in front of me now, but I believe this is correct. The Torah tells us in Parshas Pekudei, based on the donations that were given, how many shkolim there were, how many half shkolim, how many people, and you come to a number of 603,550, right? Now we're a while later, and the Yidden are being counted again. Presumably, the population has grown. Presumably, some people who weren't 20 years old before reached that age. Yet, what's interesting, the Orach Chaim says, is that the number is the same, exactly the same. And he says it's a bit disconcerting. Shouldn't we have grown in that time? But he said, actually, if you look more carefully, you see the number's not exactly the same. Because if we read through Parshas Bamidbar, we find that the number given, which totals that 603,550, is the number without Shevet Levi, because Shevet Levi were counted with their own count. Whereas when that same number was quoted earlier, that was with Shevet Levi. Let me see if I can find the Lashon. According to the conclusion that I came to, apparently it was to some an open question, was Shevet Levi involved earlier in giving Shekolim? But my conclusion was that it was, that they did. And therefore, Ein Kusha, ki b'mispah sheb'parshas Pekudei, hoyu alvim b'chlal ha'mispah, because in Parshas Pekudei the Levim were included. Ava b'mispah shelefaneinu lo nechnas alvim, and now the Levim are not included. You have the same number, but on one occasion with the Levim, one occasion without the Levim, and the Levim are an extra so and so many thousands. So indeed, Klal Yisrael had grown. This is a slightly different thing, because this what I'm about to say isn't on the inherent significance of that number, although that is significant as well. But the other idea, concept that I take from this is that previously Shevet Levi were included in the count, and Shevet Levi have a special task to be more dedicated to Torah in some way, not be fixed to a certain territory, but rather to circulate, to be the teachers of the people. However, exactly that translated itself. There's a famous Rambam which says, and this is the source of that which we might encourage someone who has a special connection to Torah, the ability to connect to Torah in a special way, to dedicate his life to it. And it's the source which is very often quoted, the Rambam at the end of Shemitah V'Yovel. It says this is what Shevet Levi did, but not Shevet Levi alone, because anyone from the rest of the Shvatim, when Nesai Libo, his heart lifts him up to do that, he can do that, and he will be Neskadish Kodesh Kadoshim. I wonder if this is now hinted, because in what happened here when the Mishkan was built and so on, that initially Shevet Levi, you can only have Shevet Levi if you have Shevet Levi. Shevet Levi is the count. Now that we can have the same number without Shevet Levi, we're hinting that we have the level that the right people can strive to be as if they were Shevet Levi, even if they're not Shevet Levi. So this, to my mind, is a very nice example of how when we focus on the numbers and we look at what the Torah is teaching us through the numbers, many beautiful ideas, lessons, concepts, and chizukim that we can take, and divrei mussar that we can take, come to light. And we've covered quite a few of them. We've covered the numbers of the counts in our parasha. We spoke about minyan 10. We spoke about 12. We actually spoke about 7 and winding with tefillin. We spoke about 22,000. We spoke about 7 sevens and 49 and 8 and 50 and Tisbru Chamishim Yom, and we spoke about the 100 and 101 in the Gemara in Chagiga. Spoke about Am Tlisoi in the Gemara in Shabbos. I forgot to mention the Pasuk in Koheles. Talks about 2, and then it said in the 4th parak, V'achot HaMeshulash Lo B'meheri Yonosek, the threefold cord doesn't, 3-ply cord doesn't come apart. And finally, we spoke about the 603,550 here in Parshas Pekudei, and the Orach Chaim's explanation of it.
So
the ideas of numbers.
Brilliant, thank you. So the number of the people in Klal Yisrael increased by exactly the same number as there were in Shevet Levi, because the number was the same, but Shevet Levi wasn't included in the second count. So you're saying that there was an exact correspondence between the increase in the number as there were people in Shevet Levi who weren't in the count.
Yeah, and I'm saying that's as if to say that even a non-Levi can sort of be as if he's a Levi, and that's the concept that that famous Rambam teaches us, and very apropos to Kabbalah Satorah as well, because it's striving to. It's the idea of Keser Torah, Keser Kohen and Keser Malchus are fixed. You can't strive to be a Kohen if you're not a Kohen. Like the famous story of the person who begged his Rav to make him a Kohen. Said, I'm sorry, I can't. But why do you want to be a Kohen anyway? He said, because my father's a Kohen. But the idea we know is that if you're Kohen, you're Kohen. If you're not, you're not. If you're Melech, you're Melech. If you're not, you're not. But Keser Kohen is sitting there, Keser Torah rather, is sitting there by the side. And in many ways, whoever wants and whoever's prepared to make the effort can come and take it. And it's an inspiring lesson for this time of year as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly say, I know we're all going to just finish this now, but I listened to a very, very fascinating podcast on the radio to try to explain why there are 7 days in the week. I mean, it's an artificial designation, an artificially devised unit of time. The 7-day week doesn't correspond to anything in nature. There's nothing in nature that has 7 days. I mean, a month is as a corresponding natural phenomenon, which is the orbit of the moon and so forth. The year has got a natural phenomenon, but there's nothing natural about 7 days.
And they were attempting to explain it without recourse to Shivas Yemei Bereshis.
Well, so that was obviously one explanation, and that's the key explanation that we use. And that's because we're instructed that there are 7 days in the week. But scholars throughout the ages, throughout the millennia, have gone to enormous lengths to try to find something natural. And the Babylonians used celestial bodies, the 7 celestial bodies that they knew about: the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn.
Yeah, they thought there were 7.
Give a day. The French meanings, the French words for each day of the week does correspond to just the sound of it corresponds to these celestial bodies. But it's actually very interesting. Why don't we have 8 days in a week or 10 days in a week? I'm talking about in the secular world. It was a very interesting use of the way we look at numbers and how there is something natural about 7 days, quite apart from the fact that we're instructed in Parshas Bereshis that is the natural, that's the ordained number of days in a week.
I think the interesting point about that is that it's clearly the point being that it's clearly a very, very ancient idea. The secular world accepts that the 7 days in the week is a very, very ancient idea and cannot explain it through any kind of historical evidence, which only helps to reinforce our understanding.
Cement our own ordained understanding.
But clearly, it derives from the creation of the world because it's that ancient.
Yeah. There's no other foundation for it, actually. I mean, of course, there are astrologers who did look at these 7 celestial bodies and try and ascribe days of the week to them. But apart from that, which seems quite arbitrary, really, because in fact there are more planets than they knew about. They certainly didn't know about Neptune or Pluto. So there could have been 9 days in a week if they were using that methodology today. So quite clearly, the underpinning for 7 days it literally has to come foundationally from Bereshis.
We talk about 7. I think it's 7 Kofei Lechas. Actually, we call them moving stars because to the eye they appear to be stars, but they're stars that do not keep a constant place in the star map.
No, that's right. But that corresponds to the astrological observations of the.
But hold on, that's without Earth. That's then because it includes the moon, I believe.
No. Earth is sun. Sun is the Earth, because until Copernicus or Tycho Brahe, I can't remember who it was that said, or the Kepler's laws of planetary motion. Earth was the sun was a planet. Sun basically revolved around the Earth. So Sunday is Earth Day, because that is the sun.
Yeah, I'm talking about what's registered in the Gemara. The Gemara talks about it in Shabbat of Kuf Chavtes. It was recognized in Jewish thought as well.
Wow, I'll have a look at that.
I'm afraid
and so on.
I need to go, but that's very nice.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Simon.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night. Have a good Shabbat, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.